Hello, this is Tony Rayns, about to undertake the daunting task of commenting on an Ozu film, 1952's Flavor of Green Tea Over Rice, Ochazuke no Aji. Daunting because Ozu is not like other directors in certain respects. Some of what we have to say about this film is going to have to be at a very detailed level, a sort of nano level, because he does work at that level in his film language, which is very distinctive, as no doubt everyone knows. So some of what we have to say will be about that. Other parts, we'll talk more about the generic qualities of this film. One of them is this opening credit sequence, which is almost an Ozu trademark. He liked to have these neatly hand-lettered characters for the names of the actors and the technicians against this backdrop of burlap or sackcloth. He continued it even through into his late colour films. And many of these credits here could equally have applied to the film before, which is Early Summer of 1951, and Tokyo Story, the following film in 1953, because quite a number of the names are the same, particularly in the technical credits. Some of the cast as well. However, we have to somehow find a way to strike a balance between very shot-specific commentaries, that's to say how he makes certain transitions, how he frames certain shots, how he edits certain sequences internally, and the larger picture of what's going on in Japan at the time, what's going on in Shochiku at the time, and what's going on in generic terms about this kind of story, which has itself certain similarities with other Ozu pictures. By this time in his career, Ozu is recovering from a certain post-war slump. There are a couple of films made in the late 40s that didn't work out so well, and were anyway very atypical of him. But now he's settling back into the genre that he will make his own for the rest of his life. He's going to live another 11 years before he dies of cancer in 1963. Most people are aware that he gradually got rid of most editing conventions in his films and preferred the static shot, eliminated much film grammar like dissolves and mixes, fades up from black, fades back to black, that kind of thing. Here we have a moving camera. The camera is moving because it's on a car. It's one of many shots of traveling in this film. We see car journeys, we see rail journeys, we even see an airplane journey later on. It's a film absolutely full of shots from moving vehicles or of moving vehicles. This is perhaps a sign that what we're going to see in this film has more to do with movement than perhaps other films. Tokyo Story, following this, is a film entirely about movement. The central couple move from place to place to place, but we never see them doing it. Here we constantly see people travelling, either leaving or arriving or departing or in transit. That reference to the PX, incidentally, is the only reference in the entire film to the fact that in 1952, America is occupying Japan. This is still the post-war period, and the Americans have not yet withdrawn and left the Japanese to get on with it for themselves. It's not clear where this shot is taken from, but it definitely establishes that we're in Ginza. However, Aya's shop, where they're stopping, this fashion retailer, is not actually in Ginza. It's next door in Nishi-Ginza, or West Ginza, which is an area nowadays known as Yurakucho. It's a slightly down-market neighbour of Ginza. It's seeking to gentrify itself by virtue of proximity to Ginza, you could say. Anyhow, this is Amamiya Aya, played by Awashima Chikage. She turns out to be one of the oldest, closest friends of Taeko, whom we've just seen in the taxi. Taeko is a rather wealthy married woman, no children of her own, and she's with her niece Setsuko. As we can see, she's a bit of a flighty shopper. Interestingly, this shot is in fact the only one in the whole film of people going up and down stairs. There's a lot of upstairs, downstairs in the film, and the Satake home has 2 levels, but we never actually see people going up and down the stairs. It's characteristic of Ozu. He rarely shows these things for some reason. unlike his contemporary Naruse, who has even made a film called When a Woman Ascends the Stairs a few years after this for Toho. Ozu, for some reason, I don't think it's phobic, but he's just not interested in the process of getting from one level to another. We are now through the shopkeeper's eyes. The shopkeeper is Aya, Amamiya Aya, played by Awashige Chikage, I'm sorry. She is a close old friend, they were at school together, of the older woman visitor, who is Taiko. She is the aunt of this young woman, Setsuko. Setsuko's family, also quite wealthy by the looks of it, live in Oiso, which is probably an hour's train ride from Tokyo. It's on the south coast of Honshu, the main island. And because it's not so convenient to live there and she's trying to pursue a career, Setsuko is staying often with her aunt and uncle in central Tokyo, Kojimachi, which is a very upmarket district that we will see shortly. Anyway, we learn some of this as we go along in the film, but the key thing now is that the central relationships are being established through Aya's eyes about these two women. She's off to see a French movie, as she said in the taxi, starring Jean Marais, probably Cocteau's Orphée, in fact, we don't know. And she's seeing it at the Piccadilly. That's a piece of product placement, because the Piccadilly is a theatre owned by Shochiku, still there to this day. They later go to the Kabuki Theatre, which is also owned by Shochiku, so that's another piece of product placement. But that's just by the by. In other respects, this scene is shot very Hollywood style. There's a master shot, which is this one, and we have cutaways within it. It's just that the cutaways are idiosyncratic to Ozu, the way he handles them. There are some eyeline matches in the Hollywood style, but there are other shots where the characters speak directly to camera when they're speaking to each other, and as we just saw, match shots where the characters are posed in exactly the same position in the frame and looking in the same direction off frame at each other, which is makes not much sense in realistic terms in the way people actually speak to each other, but makes perfect sense in terms of Ozu's distinctive film language.
どこ温泉箱根修善寺どうかしらいいわね修善寺あもしもし東和物産ですか機械部の佐竹おりますでしょうか恐れ入ります今からだと汽車何時車呼んであんたのとこへ回っても4時15分には間に合うわよそうあもしもしはいはいあそうですかいえよろしいのあそうどうも
So the phone call, the aborted phone call, has brought us to the husband, who we haven't seen yet. Where could he have gone? What we have is his empty desk in the machinery department of Toa Trading.
Yeah.
Yeah. いらっしゃいませ。
待ったかい？いえ、30分ぐらい。
This sets one pattern for the linkages between scenes in the film. Somebody, in this case, when he arrives, Mokichi asks, "Have you been here long?" And Noboru says, 30 minutes, waiting for 30 minutes. That explains to us now why Mokichi had left his office early and why his desk was empty. He's come out to have this meeting. It emerges that he was a wartime colleague, friend, in fact, of Nonchan's elder brother, who apparently died in the war. And Nonchan is now the main breadwinner, in fact, for their elderly mother, who is obviously a topic of conversation here too. And he seems to be, shall we say, a bit of a less of a serious young man than perhaps his brother was. He's played, incidentally, by Tsuruta Koji, who was a young actor-singer. We're going to see how he sings in just a moment. He was quite new in films. He'd been acting in films for 2 or 3 years, but he left Shochiku very soon after making this film, so he's not in any more Ozu films. Ozu preferring to work with the Shochiku stock company, contract players. Anyway, his looseness, he's loose is perhaps putting it a bit too strongly, but his importance in the film is quite significant in that he represents modern young spiritedness. He is the one who is expert in all forms of pop culture and pop entertainments like horse racing, cycle racing, pachinko playing, things like this we see him doing. And he's very relaxed and easygoing. He is instructing here his senior Mokichi in some of these things. And he will do so more as the film goes on. In fact, every time they meet, he teaches him something new about pop culture and modern ways. But more crucially, he does it too to Setsuko. And the film is here setting up a potential romance between these two, between the young man Noboru, or Nonchan, and the young niece Setsuko, who, as we're going to see, is going to refuse the official pattern of marriage meetings. Now, this track through a house, it's a very short tracking shot, but it establishes a pattern of movement that's going to be distinctive in this film. Ozu has used these short tracks in and out in some other films. You can see 1 or 2 of them in Early Summer, the film before this. But here they're much more prominent. You can't help noticing them, in fact, because occasionally, in fact, in one crucial part of the film, he cuts from a track in to a track out, which is very striking. Movement, a contrast of movement. Here, that track we just saw of the house was completely unmotivated. There's nothing, it just reframed the shot a little bit. And I think it served there just to introduce the house, which is going to be a key location for the film, a key setting for the film, but also it introduced the notion of movement. It noted, if you're familiar with Ozu films, you'll know that movement is not, he's not big on movement, hasn't been since the very early silent days. His early student comedies and gangster movies have lots of camera movement, but he dropped it from about the mid-30s onwards, or reduced it drastically. And here, in a slight reverse tracking shot like this one, he's following movement. Here he's tracking forward, following movement again. He's stressing, if you like, the processes of everyday life here. A homecoming, an apparently cordial marital relationship. In this scene, Taeko is behaving like the model wife. It's in fact the only time in the film that she does, at least until the very end, when it's a little different. But she's very emollient, very accommodating, very indulgent, and she's about to. The reason for this behaviour, of course, is that she's about to plant the excuse that she discussed earlier with Aya for going away to a hot spring. She's trying to be very nice so that he will agree. In point of fact, we learn later that her husband, Mokichi, sees through these subterfuges instantly, doesn't take them seriously, doesn't care about them, doesn't mind. He accepts that she's going through the motions. And he's so uninterested in it that he has trouble following it even. He's more interested in his own business, his own matters, his own cares, and so, for example, he loses track of the fact they're talking about Setsuko and doesn't believe that Setsuko is in great pain. When, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the film already, I assume you have, Setsuko is about to show up in the house, or despite what she said about going to Aya's place after the movie, thereby blowing the cover and destroying this alibi. It's of course rather embarrassing for Taeko that her alibi is destroyed in this way, but she rallies instantly, and her husband, Mokichi, barely notices. So, I think the scene takes its course in a fairly conventional way from here on. We don't need to draw attention to anything much, though we will come back to these questions of film language. So let's just say something about the origin of the film itself. The film, as we've said, fits in between Early Summer and Tokyo Story, but it has much older origins, and I fact one of the things that's interesting about it is exactly that it's a transitional film for Ozu, because it looks back to some of his late 30s projects. In particular, it echoes directly a film called What Did the Lady Forget, a comedy, very Lubitsch-style comedy made in 1937, which also has a rather bossy, imperious, upper-class wife who is very self-centered, very focused on her own creature comforts, and a rather put-upon husband who doesn't really respond to her, but is, of course, matches her social level. And that film also incidentally features a niece who is in the line to get married, into marriage proposals, and by an interesting coincidence, she's also called Setsuko. So I think there's no doubt at all that Ozu and Noda Kogo, who co-wrote the script, were thinking of what they'd done earlier in What Did the Lady Forget? However, more specifically, this film has its origins in a film that they wrote just after What Did the Lady Forget, a film called The Flavor of Green Tea Over Rice. They worked on it in 1939 for production in 1940, but it didn't get produced because the military vetoed it. It was banned, in fact, by the military as being insufficiently patriotic. They didn't feel that this was a script that contributed significantly enough to the war effort and the boosting wartime morale. So the film was vetoed. It had been sitting in Ozu's storage place ever since. And when he gave a career-length interview to the magazine Kinema Junpo, a leading Japanese film magazine, still published today, this is what he said about this film. I took this script out of storage where it had been since it was censored by the army, because there was no reason for it to stay there. In the original version, the main character departs for the war, but because times had changed, I rewrote it so that he departs for South America. But this weakened the dramatic development. I just wanted to reveal some qualities of a man from the point of view of a woman. Just as a man being good looking or having good taste. Those, incidentally, turn out to be negative things. The film's lesson is don't judge a man by the way he dresses, the way he wears a necktie or chooses his necktie. Judge him on his reliability as a person, on his character rather than his appearance. Right, we'll come back to more of this and the differences. This shot from the side of the train, which is nobody's point of view, incidentally, repeats exactly a shot in the previous film, Early Summer, but there it's the morning commute for the husband in the film through a very different kind of landscape. This is a very typical Ozu establishing shot, a series of establishing shots, we should say. This is the ryokan, the country inn, in this case a hot spring resort, where the women have come for their short break. The first shot is of the surrounding mountain, heavily wooded. We know that it's from the inn because those canopies, those little bamboo curtains that hang above the canopy, above the balcony rather, are in the top of the shot. And also uses exactly the same shot to frame the sequence. So when they finally leave this ryokan, at the end of two sequences, we see them tonight and then we see them again next morning, that same shot recurs to, as it were, bracket the scene. That's a very typical Ozu strategy. The train journey, though, is more typical of this film because, as we said at the outset, this has a lot of travelling in it, this film, and that's the first train shot in the movie, but not the last. Now, these scenes, the women taking their break together, are, I can't say taken directly from, but certainly strongly reminiscent of What Did the Lady Forget of 1937. We said that this film has clear origins in that film. That film was a Lubitskian comedy. There's a lot about women talking about their husbands in the film when they get together, drinking, getting gossipy, dropping their guard, and that's what happens here. It's a hen party, as it were, in which people speak frankly. This little detail of Taeko having placed a call to Tokyo to confirm to her husband that she's there and to update him on the supposed illness of Takako, who has replaced Setsuko as the supposed invalid, the reason for being there. But that simply consolidates the excuse that's being drawn, and also introduces the notion that husbands are gullible, stupid, boring, easily fooled, can easily have wool pulled over their eyes. As we see later on, we discover that Mokichi is not for a moment fooled, and whether he appreciates her going through these motions or not is never explained or explored. But she congratulates herself on having tricked him, only to be a bit thwarted because the call hasn't ended from his end. So this is introducing something of the space that exists between the husband and the wife, which is going to become a crucial plot point of the main part of the film. Done very succinctly, and that notion of the call that wasn't quite cut off, it was cut off at her end but not at his end, is an interesting way of doing it. It reflects, incidentally, the telephone system of 1952, where most calls had to be connected through an operator. Long-distance calls had to be connected through an operator for sure. So she had to book that call to Tokyo. They're in Shuzenji, which is in Fuji National Park. Again, it's about an hour or so out of Tokyo by train. Fuji is itself an extinct volcano, but there is a lot of it's a volcanic area, the national park. It's heavily wooded, as you can see from the surrounding hills, mountains, and it's basically volcanic, so there's a lot of hot springs under the ground, and it's an area rich in hot spring resorts. It's also almost completely undeveloped. There's very little in the way of modern housing. Villages tend to be quite small and traditional. So it's a favourite spot for ryokan. If you want to get away from the bustle and complexity of city life, this is the kind of place to come. That happens in What Did the Lady Forget also, and Ozu is clearly thinking back to what he did in that film. It's now, 15 years earlier, but this is, I can't say it's a remake of What Did the Lady Forget, but there's definitely a family relationship between the two films. Now, updating the old 1939-40 script to 1952 for this film not only meant eliminating the idea of the husband going off to war service to serve in the military, and replaced it with the idea that he gets posted overseas, at least on a short trip. It's not clear, in fact, how long he has to go to South America. It changes much about the social point of the marriage conflict, and it changes the meaning of the humble dish that they end up sharing at the end of the film. The crucial thing here is that this is an upmarket couple, but they're very different from each other. We've already seen that he and his wife have we've glimpsed her room, which is a completely Western style room. She sleeps on a Western bed. She has Western designed furniture, although she herself always wears kimono. He, at work, wears a Western style business suit, at home puts on a yukata, a light kimono robe, which is normal, relaxing housewear, but he sleeps on a futon, which the maid Fumi has just laid out for him on the tatami mat floor. So they have different attitudes, different tastes, different behaviors. He's adjusted completely to modern life by wearing Western-style suits for work, for example, and his work practice is absolutely conventional of the post-war years. She is also completely adapted to post-war life, but hers is a more frivolous high life, and it's rooted in many ways in old traditions. She hasn't in any way modernized herself except in fashion terms. She still thinks as she did when she was a schoolgirl. That, I think, was the point of the conversation with Aya in the shop. And here we are back at the ryokan in Shuzenji in Fuji National Park. These shots, one is different, one is more or less the same. Ozu likes to have establishing shots of this kind. Sometimes he repeats the same one, sometimes he varies it. And as I said earlier, in this one, he's going to end the scene with a repeat of the shot that introduced the place in the beginning, or 2 scenes ago. Now, Setsuko's hangover is it's a plot point, of course, but it signals a change in all the conversation about how boring husbands are, how stupid and gullible husbands are. Setsuko joins in. She laughs along with the jokes. She's happy to take the insults against husbands at face value, and she thinks it's kind of funny. And she's about to do more of the same. If you look at her reaction in those sequences, you can see that she's completely being one of the girls at this point. Later, she is going to remonstrate with her aunt. I would never do that. I don't want my marriage to be like yours. Yours was an arranged marriage. I'm not going to have something like that. I will choose my own husband, and I will not be rude about him behind his back. She's happy enough in this scene to do that. She's not later. She uses it as a way of attacking her aunt, in fact. It's a trivial point. They're all wearing the same yukata. These things, just in case it's not clear, not because they all went to the same shop, it's because they're staying in the same ryokan. Normally, Japanese inns of this kind supply this kind of robes to sleep in, or as day wear if you're staying in. You wear your own clothes to go out, but while you're in the room, you dress up in the simple robe that they provide, and it's normally a house robe, so they all have the same design, same colours, same patterns, same everything. They were wearing the same robes last night for sleeping in. They were preparing for sleep last night when they were drinking. Now they're wearing morning robes, also supplied by the establishment. Now, these parodies of husbands, these jokes about how stupid husbands are, how boring their routines are, have an underlying point, because Aya, the one who is leading the attack in this scene, mocking the carp as husbands, turns out to have the weakest husband of a lot of them. In fact, he's contrasted in the later part of the film with Mokichi, who is, by comparison, a model of stability, concern, reasonableness, and enlightenment. Her husband, Aya's husband, is a complete nerd who'll be glimpsed several times. In fact, we're going to see him very shortly for the first time. And we'll see him again in a very embarrassing scene later in the picture in Aya's office. And he's the single worst husband in the film, in a film that's concerned partly about marriage conventions, partly about the stability and meaning of marriage, what women should expect when they submit to marriage, whether they think it's a good idea or not to have arranged marriages. These are questions that dominate the plot of the film. And Aya's husband, his name is Toichiro, is the absolute negative model in the movie. He's the single worst guy. Here, as I said, is the same shot as we began with, marking the end of the visit to Shuzenji. Now, Aya has just mentioned about missing a baseball game, so this establishing shot, which takes us to a baseball ground, needs no further explanation, really. It's another way of linking scenes. Again, just a passing reference to baseball is enough to take us to a baseball ground. This is clearly a different occasion. This is some time has passed since we were at the spa, the hot spring resort. We don't know exactly how long. The film isn't clear about it, doesn't need us to be clear about it, but this is probably the next time these women have gotten together. On this occasion, Setsuko is not there. She's doing something else. So it's the three older women. And Takako notices, she's the one who notices that Aya's husband is there. Aya is baffled because he doesn't even like baseball very much, not that interested. But we discover that the reason he's there is because he's taking a mistress out, a bar girl, also from Nishiginza. She recognizes her because her bar is probably rather close to Aya's shop, also in Nishiginza. As I said, it's some slightly down-market area adjacent to Ginza. This is what I was saying earlier about Toichiro, the husband, being the prime negative example of husband behavior in the film. He is, however, completely henpecked by Aya. He relies on her for money and support, and she knows exactly how to treat him. She treats him basically as a naughty little boy and has no time for him, doesn't indulge him in the slightest bit. All of this is, I guess, a good example of the way Ozu patterns plots. And something I guess he learned from Lubitsch. You have a central intrigue, a central plot, which raises a series of issues, in this case about marriage. And then you have other plots around it, which somehow amplify it or contrast it or throw it into some kind of relief. In this film, the central dynamic is between Taeko and Mokichi's marriage and its shakiness or otherwise, and Setsuko's marriage plan. Taeko is going to conspire with her sister Chizu, who lives in Oiso, as we said, away from Tokyo, to arrange a marriage for the niece, for Setsuko, which Setsuko is in turn going to refuse. That kind of arranged marriage was the norm in the years before the war. It was the kind of thing that both the sisters went through. So Taeko had an arranged marriage to Mokichi. Chizu had an arranged marriage to her husband. Another reframing shot, incidentally, of the Satake house. Character receding gracefully as the maid rushes to welcome home the wife of the house. It was a retreat, I think, because it somehow reflected Taeko's irritation at being paged in public and dragged away from the game that she was enjoying with her friends. I'm not sure that she was enjoying the game, but she was enjoying being with her friends. But we'll come back later on in this commentary to the question of what those short tracks forward and backward mean in the film, why Ozu uses them. Anyhow, back to the Lubitsch point, this issue of Setsuko being pressed into an omiai, which is a marriage meeting, a formal marriage meeting, where a young woman is introduced to her prospective suitor, somebody she's never set eyes on before in most cases, and invited to decide whether she likes him or not and whether she accepts him or not as a potential husband material. That's the main subplot that resonates with the film. In fact, you could even argue that it takes over the film, that maybe that is ultimately the main plot, because that's what the film begins and ends with. At the very beginning, the first scene in the taxi, Setsuko spots Nonchan on the sidewalk, walking either to his meeting with Mokichi or to the exam that he's about to sit. At the very end of the film, you'll see he's on another street where the two of them, Setsuko and Nonchan, are together. It's the first time they've had a solo date, you could say. So insofar as their potential romance, it's definitely not a real romance, but as far as it's a potential romance, it frames the picture. You could say it's even the ultimate main subject of the film. Anyhow, in this context, the business about Aya and her faithless husband, the stupid, nerdy, idiot husband who depends on her totally for everything, including his pocket money, and who at the same time dares to try and date a bar girl, unbeknownst to him, she's watching him do it, is, if you like, a third layer of parallelism. And I think very Lubitschean, the sarcasm that attends it, the Aya's cynical acceptance of the fact that he's trying to play away by taking a bar girl out to the baseball, her acceptance of it and her determination to punish him for it by forcing him to buy something expensive for her, and later, as you'll see, for taking away his pocket money. Now, I want to talk in more detail about eyeline matching later on, but let's say a little bit here. Setsuko turning on her aunt, reminiscing about what went on in the hot spring resort, is done frontally, you've noticed. The cutaway is a slight track forward to Mokichi at his desk, doing his work. Doesn't seem to be terribly busy compared with those around him who are hammering away at their typewriters. That's just as well, because he's wanted by the president, President Okawa, the boss of Toa Trading. It turns out, well, this again, we noted that the shots of the office are like a leitmotif in the film. It's the same every time. This is also setting up a journey that he will make again later. This time there's a workman's ladder, a step ladder, and some beer bottles and some paint cans, by the look of it, on the floor here. Next time we see that same shot, there will be only fire buckets stretched along the corridor. So the painting or repainting has been finished by then. It turns out that Mr. Okawa here, the president of Toa, has basically summoned him just because his father-in-law is visiting. This is Taeko's father, has come from Oiso, is making small talk. He's come to visit Okawa, who is clearly his old friend, and is able to interrupt the president during the middle of the working day, just to stop by for the time of day, in fact. But this brief encounter with Mokichi is very short-lived because he gets another visitor. However, this is the nub of why he came. He wants Mokichi to ask his wife to visit Oiso. This, we will discover shortly, is to discuss the omiae, the marriage proposal meeting. But it also drops the news for the first time in the film that Mokichi might be sent abroad at some point. He goes not to his office actually this time, but to a reception area in the office, where who should be there but Nonchan Noboru, with the happy news that he passed the exam and is hired. So he's asking Mokichi to write a reference for him and to invite him out at his expense. Well, the younger man doesn't normally pay the bills on a night out like this, but on this case he's expressing his gratitude and stressing that he's going to take him to a cheap place. This is not a problem for Mokichi. Some people in Mokichi's position would be rather insulted by this offer. Nonchan knows that he will not be and feels confident to offer him a night out at his expense, and it'll be someplace where the portions are large and the price is low. So Mokichi is not in any way insulted by this. Now, the place which serves tonkatsu in large portions at a low price is called the Calorie Hut. This is not the first Calorie Hut in Ozu. In 1931, he had, in a film called Tokyo Chorus, a man who used to be a teacher and has quit school and has opened his own little restaurant, runs a place called the Calorie Hut. It looks very different from this one, but it's a name that Ozu obviously liked and thought was funny, so he's used it again 21 years later. Very typical Ozu strategy. We don't see the Calorie Hut, the interior. We don't see anything of them eating. We jump straight from that. The signboard, it covers the entire scene of them having their dinner together. We go straight from that to the pachinko parlor, which presumably is nearby. Pachinko parlor is called the Bittersweet School of Life, which is a very odd title for a pachinko parlor. Pachinko is becoming incredibly popular in Japan at this time. It's nowadays associated very largely with the Korean immigrant community or the Korean Japanese community, but at this time was not so much so. But it was new at this time, and this kind of Pachinko parlor was springing up across many Japanese cities, most Japanese cities, in fact. And here it emerges that the owner of the place, who gave it this strange name, Bittersweet, is an old friend. He served under Mokichi in the war. This, of course, is Ryu Chishu, Ozu's so-called fetish actor. He was in, by his own account, he was in all but 2 of all the films Ozu made. Ozu made something like 50-odd films, and Ryu was in all of them. In the early ones, he tends to be in bit parts, just makes a brief appearance. From the mid-30s onwards, he's in leading roles, and from that point on, he's in either a leading role. He's, of course, going to play the grandfather in Tokyo Story, the next film along. Here, this is a cameo, I guess you'd say. It's a small character role, but it's a significant one, because he is the one who takes Mokichi back to his war years. And Ozu has not been concerned in this film to give us any kind of backstory about the main characters. Anyhow, here in this scene, where we have some reminiscence about the war years, and particularly about the posting to Singapore, we learn a little bit more about Mokichi, who must have done war service. Now, it's interesting to note that Ozu cast Saburi Shin in this film as Mokichi because he had been the intended casting in the original idea for the film in 1939-1940. Had the film been made in 1940, had the army censors not vetoed it, it would have starred Saburi Shin as the husband going off to war at the end of the film. His wife was to be played by Kawano Michiko, and I have no doubt actually that Ozu would have brought her back to play the wife in this film too. Unfortunately, though, she had died in the interim. She died in 1946, so it was not possible to cast her again. Hence the casting of Kugure Michio as the rather snooty wife instead. In this rewrite of the script, where he's a wealthy man living in a lavish 2-story house in a very upmarket district of Kojimachi, he must be immensely wealthy. It can't come from his job as a manager at Toa, so there must be some family wealth behind it, possibly from her father, the man we've just seen briefly in the president's office. He has retreated with his family to the coast, Oiso. Maybe he is the wealthy one who financed the house in Kojimachi, because it seems clear that on Mokichi's salary he couldn't have done so. Anyhow, my point is that we learn little. Ozu tells us deliberately, I think, almost nothing about the backstories of these characters. We learn very little about it. So the point of this scene is to give us the wartime backstory. They share, he and Hirayama, his name is, the pachinko parlor owner. Hirayama hates war, doesn't want to think back warmly about it, and he doesn't like his new job either, it turns out. It turns out that he thinks pachinko is a bad thing socially. It's a new fashion, but and he's profiting from it. It's giving him some kind of a living, but he regrets it. He thinks it's socially unhealthy, and he doesn't like the fact that it's so popular. So in that sense, he's quite opinionated, but most of the time he utters very conventional courtesy platitudes. Almost everything he says is very standard, oiling the wheels kind of Japanese. He doesn't really say much of any consequence or significance. However, this reminiscence of Singapore is, of course, very personal for Ozu. Ozu himself, in 1943, was sent to Singapore. It's where, famously, he saw captured American films, which were banned at the time in Japan. So he famously saw, for example, Fantasia, Citizen Kane in Singapore. He very amusingly said in that interview that we quoted earlier, it was when he saw Fantasia that he thought, we might be in trouble. These guys could beat us in this war. He thought Fantasia was such a clever film that it indicated the threat that the Americans posed to them. Anyhow, whatever the personal meaning of this scene for Ozu, these warm reminiscences of Singapore. This is a John Ford-like scene, which of the kind that occurs in many of his films in the post-war period. People look back on their war service with a certain kind of nostalgia for the camaraderie, but also for a kind of way of life, not in the war, but in the camaraderie, that is not as prevalent anymore. So we think that Hirayama's dissatisfaction with the pachinko crowd that he pulls in is somehow related to the fact that they don't behave like people used to behave when he was a young man. Now here we go to Oiso. We know, again, this is a very conventional link for Ozu. He's using shots of the station, part of the pattern of travel shots in the film, or shots that connote travel in the film, to take us there. But we're not going to go through the rigmarole of seeing anybody arriving, in fact, because she's already there. Taeko has responded to the request uttered in the president's office that she should visit Oiso, which is after all her family home as well. And the husband we saw in the office when he visited Tokyo, is now busy at work in the garden. A very homely, decent chap. He's quite like, in that respect, quite like Mokichi, I guess. His name is Naosuke. The family name is Yamauchi. And the two Yamauchi sisters are talking to each other while the kid, presumably Setsuko's younger brother, is being quite a good boy compared with some other kids in Ozu. Now, maybe this is the moment because they're going to have a conversation. These references, incidentally, are also to Shochiku theatres. This is more Shochiku product placement. Togeki, which just got mentioned, is a Shochiku theatre still to this day, and a Kabuki theatre, which is not very far away. This is in Higashi Ginza, East Ginza, not very far away from Ginza itself. Anyhow, these women are now discussing the plan for a marriage meeting to try and set Setsuko up with a potential husband. The claim is that she finally agreed. We later learned that she didn't really agree, but gave in to the nagging of her mother. These shots, the women are not exactly facing each other, you notice. They're sitting at opposite ends of the table to each other, although they are facing each other. They're not directly opposite each other. However, we cut to frontal shots. They're speaking as if they are directly facing each other, but they're not. This is an Ozu convention, and we'll come back to this again. There's a later scene where this is very relevant and salient to the film, to our discussion of the film language of the film. But here I think that we can introduce this notion by pointing out that this shows here that kind of cutting, the non-eyeline match cutting, as if they were facing each other when they're in fact not, is to do with the degree of intimacy between them. These are two sisters talking to each other. They grew up together. They know each other very well. That's why it's cut that way. This tracking shot through the Kabuki theatre exactly reproduces a tracking shot in the previous film, Early Summer. There's also a brief visit. A visiting relative is taken to the Kabuki and sat in a box at the side, just like this. This is the prospective suitor. This is the occasion on Sunday for the supposed marriage checking out ceremony, the omiai. However, the prospective bride has not shown up, and it's causing grave disquiet to both of them, not to say embarrassment. He, we learn, is the son of a diplomat, or if not a diplomat, then an embassy worker. He's stationed in Stockholm in Sweden. His father, rather, is stationed in Stockholm. So he's prime husband material in that sense, but that's probably exactly why Setsuko is not so interested in him. Anyhow, he causes great embarrassment to the women, and to him, of course, that she hasn't shown up for this meeting. She later claims she did show up, but then ran away. She is brought back one scene later by her uncle, and then runs away again, apparently. It's not clear if she does make any effort at all to check out the prospective groom, but we don't see. It's elided, it's off screen. In any case, I think the reason it's off screen is that it doesn't really matter very much, because the key thing here is Setsuko's refusal. As we're going to see in a scene after this, Setsuko is a refusenik. She, in a very un-Japanese way, she chants the word "ie, ie, ie," no, no, no. It's like Margaret Thatcher almost. It's a very strong, intolerant refusal. There we had, that sequence ended at the Kabuki Theatre with a tracking shot following the two women as they pursue their search. That slight forward track, I think, signified their optimism. Here we have another Ozu convention, the cut, 180-degree cut, the cut from one side to 180-degree opposite view. The first one is of Mokichi at his desk writing. The second one is from behind Mokichi, from the window side. And we see then, for the first time in the film actually, the rest of the room, and that Non-chan is there visiting. He's come to collect his reference. And once again, he's suggesting an excursion. It is, after all, Sunday. And he suggests going to the races, something else that Mokichi has not done before. He's recommending horse racing and saying it compares very favourably with pachinko. But pachinko has struck Mokichi in a big way. This is the most philosophical thing he's said so far in the film. He finds that it's a way of distancing himself, losing himself in himself. This makes Non-chan rethink the proposal for the afternoon. He makes a connection between pachinko and bicycle racing, cycle racing, and a velodrome. So bicycle racing would be better than... All of these things are seen as microcosms of life. Pachinko was seen as one absolutely by Hirayama, the ex-army man who runs the place. That's why he called it the bittersweet school of life. So the notion that these sporting or amusement pastimes are somehow ciphers for some larger patterns of life is a very recurrent one in Ozu. In fact, every time we take in a game, a baseball game, a cycle race, a pachinko afternoon, we are, in Ozu's terms, playing with a cipher for the way we live our lives. Are we balls passing through the system? I think this might also relate to the recurrent patterns in Ozu films. The fact that when we return to a room, we see it the same way we saw it before. When we go back to Mokichi's office, it's introduced the same way every time. When he goes down a corridor, it's a corridor that we have seen more than once before. So these patterns, and they're of course reproduced within this house itself, are also, in a way you could say that they're like channels in the pachinko machine through which the ball must pass and drop. People pass through them. It's a sign that life is going on following its normal course. When Ozu shows them empty, when Ozu shows them without people in them, it's like a pachinko machine without a ball dropping through it. It's like the machine at rest rather than at play. Of course, it has greater poignancy when it's an empty house, and also plays with the lighting also. So using the house as an empty, darkened space is even more poignant. That track forward definitely signals anticipation. It signals the fact that Non-Chan is looking forward to the cycle racing in the velodrome. It signals that Mokichi is looking forward to returning Setsuko to the Kabuki Theatre, Kabuki-za. It's also in Higashi Ginza, by the way. It's still there, been there for a century or more. The only one not looking forward to anything is Setsuko, who really doesn't want to go back. And as we are about to discover, she hasn't really gone back, so it could even be representing her secret intention not to go. In any event, it's an emotive tracking shot. It's a tracking shot that somehow connects with the forward-looking, anticipatory feelings of the characters in the scene. Here indeed is Setsuko, fresh from her non-meeting.
ずいぶん探しちゃった。
どうしたんだよ。
また来ちゃった。
ダメじゃないか、季節ちゃん。知らないぞ。
いいのよ。
ダメだよ。
His embarrassment is not disapproval of her to any great extent. It's much more the fact that he's going to be embarrassed by it. And he will also feel for the others in that she hasn't observed traditional courtesies. I mean, to stand people up when they've made an effort to go out to meet you is very discourteous, and she has been discourteous, and she's blasé about it. This is a source of embarrassment to Mokichi. It's not a source of embarrassment to Non-Chan, who is also present, and as we'll see in a moment, they will discuss when Mokichi later on this afternoon leaves them alone. Non-Chan brings it up. They return to the question of the Omiai marriage meeting and why she didn't go and what it meant and what he would have done in the same situation. So we're still dancing around the main theme, the idea of how you match people, whether people should be matched on the basis of social connections or whether they should be matched on the basis of personal feelings, random encounters, how much can you trust people? And at the same time, we're following the slowly evolving liaison between Non-Chan and Setsuko, who are about the same age, seem to have a quite similar temperament and background. They both have a strong rebellious streak. But Non-Chan is very laid back. He wouldn't be the one going, yeah, no, 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 as she just did in the previous scene. He doesn't think like that. He doesn't behave like that. I called him louche a little while ago, and louche is perhaps too strong a word because it implies a certain kind of dissolution. And I don't think he's dissolute, but he's certainly a bit of a slacker. In his very first conversation, with Mokichi in the bar, he didn't know what CPS meant in the exam, and of course Mokichi did. It was partly there to tell us that Mokichi is quite good in foreign languages. He understands this thing, he understands the business jargon, he's quite sophisticated about this, which of course makes him very suitable to be dispatched overseas because he doesn't speak Spanish as far as we know, so that's not. So he'll need to, in Uruguay, in Montevideo, he'll need to speak English, I think. So it served to do that, but it indicated that Non-Chan was not that impressive a talent, in fact, in business terms. He takes it easy, doesn't apply himself in quite the same way as he does to Pachinko, as he does in this shot. So, back to Pachinko, we had the calorie hut again. Once again, the shot of the signboard was the entire scene. We don't need to see them eating there again. But now Mokichi is being a bit of the grown-up in the room here and suggesting that he is the only one feeling any kind of embarrassment in this situation, because he knows that his wife and his sister-in-law have been stood up, not to mention the prospective groom, and he's embarrassed about the whole thing, and he's going back to, as it were, face the music. She's refusing to join because she's enjoying it. Now this is her first time in Pachinko, just as last time was his first time, and she's also taking to it like a duck to water. And Hirayama, we're going to see Hirayama one more time in the film, but they're having frontal exchanges as he leaves. I mean, their eyeline matches are to camera, not to each other. And that indicates the degree of intimacy that exists between them, just as it did between the sisters in the previous scene. Now, his departure sets up the potential romance between these two. They know each other already. At the very beginning of the film, she recognises him even from behind on the street, with his second-hand suits and his jaunty way of walking. But this is the first time we've seen them alone together, and this is setting up their conversation. He takes her this time to a very cheap ramen bar. This is very, very ordinary ramen place in a down market area of the city. And this is the kind of place you go for cheap, simple, humble food. You sit at counters like this, side by side. This is all very normal. And here, she is eating in exactly the same way that Non-chan eats, and as it happens, that her uncle eats, which we later learn causes such distress and embarrassment to her aunt, that is, by lifting the bowl to her lips to drink the soup. Aunt Taeko thinks that this is like eating like a dog. She thinks it lacks table manners, is uncouth, unsophisticated, and unacceptable. It becomes a major point of issue between her and her husband when their marriage starts to reach a crisis point. However, it's clearly not a problem between these two because they both do it. And she's not copying Non-chan. She did it already, I think. Anyway, she's completely at home in a place like this, and their conversation is not so different in its way. It forms a parallel, anyway, with a conversation we will hear much later in the film between husband and wife, between Taeko and Mokichi. He's arguing the virtues of simplicity, straightforwardness, and he's particularly praising the homeliness of this food, which is good, generous portions, and not expensive. She fills herself up with one bowl, he needs a second. Anyway, he's an apostle for good, cheap eating. He's the kind of guy who doesn't believe in fine dining. He believes in finding good places which are not expensive and where they don't stint on the portion size. And they, you notice, are also exchanging glances to each other frontally. They're not eyeline matching, they're just looking at the camera, both of them, which signals at this point in the film that their intimacy is increasing very rapidly. They're in tune with each other, in short. So these formal devices, these characteristics of Ozu's cutting, I think are very clearly related to emotional questions. Here again, the canopy of the ramen place frames the scene and brings us to an end of the scene, takes us out of the scene. And now we have the confrontation between husband and wife, the beginning of it anyway. Again, they're looking at each other frontally, although they're not in fact sitting opposite each other. So this is a tricked match by Ozu, very typical strategy. He's to one side of the table, she's to the other side of the table, and he's at one end, she's at the other. But when they speak to each other, they look directly to camera, as if we were seeing from each other's point of view. This is partly because they're speaking very frankly, but also because they're husband and wife. They usually speak in this way, and their conversations are usually cut this way by Ozu. It doesn't mean they can't look away, but it does mean that when they address each other, they look frontally forward. So there's no eyeline matching, direction of eyeline match, as in the conventional Hollywood way. I think the camera movements in Ozu, in this film in particular, also have emotional value. They serve to underline emotions felt by the characters and to express something about the relationships between the characters. They're not purely formal devices. They are formal devices, and they are very much imbricated in the film language that Ozu chooses, which is never quite the same from film to film. but they also have a connection to the emotions felt in the drama. They're not just random decorations, as it were. They're not purely formal strategies to do with putting the thing together. They are there to underline dramatic points. Ozu wants the audience to feel. By this time, in the early 1950s, in the post-war period, the period of Japan's transition to democracy, as General MacArthur wanted it, by this time Shochiku's films, which are shown, of course, in Shochiku theatres, are attracting a predominantly female audience. And this film, like most Ozu films, was made basically for a woman audience. It doesn't mean that men didn't ever see them, but the audience was overwhelmingly female at the time. And this is perceived to be a film in a way from a woman's point of view. When Ozu described it, you remember in the short interview, the answer that he gave on this film particularly, he said he wanted to show a man from the point of view of a woman. This, of course, makes most sense if you think of the audience as also being mostly women. And Shochiku was absolutely attuned to the idea that an audience might be majority women for a film like this. So the appeal of this kind of home drama was basically to the female part of the audience. One of the reasons that soon after this, a large number of directors, including, or some directors to be, like Suzuki Seijun, other assistant directors like Imamura Shohei, left Shochiku in 1954 because Nikatsu reactivated. Nikatsu was the oldest Japanese film company, but had been put into a forced merger during the war years. And in 1954, it finally managed to extricate itself and start operating as a solo act again. And when it opened, lots and lots of unhappy directors, or directorial staff at least, applied to join Nikatsu because they thought they would have more freedom there. That was certainly Imamura's feeling. Imamura worked as an assistant to Ozu on 3 films. This, I think, was not one of them, but Tokyo Story was. And he felt he was not happy with the films, but he was also not happy with the method or the working atmosphere in Shochiku. But Ozu was very comfortable in Shochiku and very comfortable with the Shochiku audience and very comfortable with this genre, which is, as I said at the outset, the one he stuck with pretty much to the end of his career now. So the marriage is approaching its crisis point now. The couple are about to be frank and to a slight degree rude with each other. And I think this is perhaps the moment, the long delayed moment, when we should say something more specific about the editing strategies in the film. There is a very clear connection between not only intimacy, we said before that frontally matched close-ups during conversation scenes are indications of the degree of intimacy between the characters. So husband and wife normally speak to each other in exchanged frontal close-ups with no real regard for the question of eyeline matching. Here, they don't. In fact, earlier in this scene, when Taeko and Mokichi were sitting opposite each other on a table, the low table downstairs, they were eyeline matched in a conventional Hollywood way, and it was an indication precisely that they didn't see eye to eye. They normally speak to each other in exchanged close-ups, which are frontal. Here now, it shifts from one to the other. This is not a frontal close-up. She's looking down at him from her correct position, more or less. This is observing the conventional construction of space in the scene. So Taeko's "wakarimashita," I have understood, is a very chilling utterance here, just as his comment that she was lining up Setsuko for a marriage like theirs was the first negative thing he has said to his wife about the state of their marriage, and it is a bit of a game changer. So the same shots as before, introducing Aya's shop, downstairs, top of the landing, inside her room. But let me just say first that one of the reasons that some critics in Japan have complained about the film is that by inheriting the casting of Saburi Shin from the original product in 1939-40 and retaining him as the lead, the husband, in this 1952 film, he's of course 12 years older than he was at the intended time of original production. Now, That makes him well into middle age. In real life, he was, I don't know, 40 something. And it is slightly implausible, and many Japanese critics have complained about this, that he and his wife could reach this stage of their marriage without having had this kind of clash, this kind of open airing of their differences in attitude, in table manners, eating habits, that kind of thing, much before the time that we now see them. And I think it's true. It's possible that Ozu failed to update the original concept adequately, because by presenting a couple who are already well into middle age and possibly even verging on late middle age, it's not terribly plausible that they would have this kind of marital problem now just because of a disagreement about a marriage proposal for their niece. However, Ozu tries to get around this by devices like the one we're looking at now. Here is our first close-up look at Toichiro, the errant husband of Aya, and he's a typical salaryman type. I think not managerial, probably.
5円満で結構です。
はい。
いや、じゃあ、
ちょっと。ちょいと。
何？
今の。
何？これ？
Giving with one hand and snatching away with the other is the way she now treats him. This is, of course, his punishment for flirting with bar girls at the baseball.
いいわね、お宅の旦那様。
あれだって苦労あるわよ。
そうかしら。
Anyway, the contrast in Aya's marriage is part of Ozu's strategy for making us accept the marital difficulties between Taeko and Mokichi. I think he's, if you like, it's a bit of sleight of hand. He's distracting attention from their relative advanced years and trying to focus the issue back onto the question of marriage itself and how married couples treat each other. So Aya's way of treating her husband is let's say, more pragmatic than Taeko's way. Taeko is still very agitated emotionally and being reminded of her backstory. Again, this is the one time we hear something about how she behaved when she was a schoolgirl. And then there's this extraordinary cut. It's as if Aya and Setsuko are still talking. That is an eyeline match of the classic Hollywood type, except that they're in different places at different times. So for the one time in the film that the scenes are matched in this way, she in one place looking off to the right, and Taeko in another place looking off to the left, are matched as if it were a Hollywood eyeline match, but in fact it's a scene transition. So this, once again, as usual, the eyeline match in Hollywood style signifies estrangement. It signifies a lack of closeness. So as she has had an argument by refusing to take home truths from her old school friend, so Anna has walked out. There's a problem between them, and that's why that Hollywood style eyeline match serves to indicate estrangement. Okay, so this amplification of the confrontation between husband and wife now moves into the arena of eating habits. Again, it's a little hard to believe this didn't happen a decade, if not 2 decades earlier. We don't know how long they've been married, but since they don't have children to bind them, the fact that he eats like this with a bowl in his hand and raising it to his mouth to shovel rice, and she says this is the way a dog eats. She conversely keeps her chopsticks, very much her own chopsticks, in their own little case and eats in a much more proper way, except that of course she's not going to eat at all now to register her protest against his eating habits. Now this is a class-based thing, and it's also a countryside versus urban sophisticate thing, as we're going to see at the end of the scene. This is done in frontal close-ups, direct eyeline gaze to camera, pretty much. Yeah, she may be slightly off, but very nearly to camera, with side glances towards Fumiko. Because they're speaking sincerely now, there's a sincere clash now, and home truths are being uttered. Taiko's attempt to drag Fumi into it fails. She stays silent, and she doesn't join in the conversation, in fact, until Taiko has gone. But the issue that emerges after this clash, it's because he carries on eating. Of course, after she has complained, he exasperates her, drives her out of the room. I've made you angry, made her angry, he says. It's because he keeps on doing it despite her complaint. Leads to the conversation with Fumi about habits in her home, which is in Saitama Prefecture, very far from Tokyo. And he comes from Nagano, which is also quite far from Tokyo. And he's suggesting at long last, as I say, it does seem a bit late in the day, given how long they've been married, that local habits in Tokyo sophisticates don't eat this way. And she reveals that she's suppressed the habit because Madam doesn't like it. So the thing takes on a class dimension, which is not very marked elsewhere in the film. The film does take place very largely in an upper middle class milieu. And as I said, Koji Machi was Ozu's signifier. Ozu, of course, made many, many films set in different parts of Tokyo. And there are many films, as people have noted repeatedly, with Tokyo in the title. This is not one of them, but it might easily have been. However, Koji Machi was his go-to default signifier of upper middle class lives. As we said before, this film is in a curious way related to What Did the Lady Forget from 1937. That was set in Koji Machi too. So it's been a constant as a kind of signifier of upper middle class life for Ozu for quite a long time now, since before the war anyway. And another aspect of the film language here is these slightly too long holds on empty spaces in the room. Somebody goes out, particularly through the door of Taeko's bedroom, and we hold a little bit too long on the shot. I say too long. I'm not complaining at all, but it holds longer than most editors would hold, and it relates, I think, to the shots of empty corridors a bit later in the film when the couple, in fact, de facto separate. This is something that, more than a decade later, Antonioni was being praised for his brilliantly innovative film language, showing the spaces where the characters had been without the characters, so that we're remembered of the ghosts of the characters. That obviously the end of The Eclipse is the most striking example of that, but there are examples in L'Avventura as well, a couple of years earlier. Ozu was doing it. I think it has precisely the same resonance in Ozu. He holds on rooms, he holds a shot longer after characters have gone out of the room, precisely to make us think about or remind us of what has been going on in this room. In that particular case, when they had a non-conversation in Taeko's bedroom, he came in, she immediately protested by getting up and leaving. He followed her out, he closed the door behind him. We held on the closed door for a little bit longer than most editors would have done. And then we went to his upstairs room, and she comes up, she's summoned up, and they have a further conversation.
子供の時から田舎であやつだったもんだから知らないでやってたよ。別に悪いとは思わなかった。
悪いとは申し上げておりません。
いや、もうやめるよ。しかし、どうしてことごとにそうなんだな。
何がですの？
いや、例えばタバコだけど。
This time it moves on from ways of smoking to, ways of eating to ways of smoking. He likes cheap working class cigarettes, He doesn't mind taking third class on the train. In fact, he prefers it. And she's very happy to stick with her first class. At the end of this scene, she flounces out again. Taeko does a lot of flouncing in this film because she's so self-absorbed, because she's so comfortable in her cocooned life. She's always sure that she's right, which is exactly what Aya accused her of in the last shop scene. He proclaims here his way of life, his preferred way of life. Cozy, down to earth, he says, but he speaks of being intimate and primitive. Intimate and primitive are his watchwords. He even uses the English words. He likes to feel relaxed. At the end of it, which you notice it was done through conventional eyeline matching, not through frontal address to the camera as the other, because it represents a schism, a rift between them. They're speaking to each other in ways that they've not done before. He tries to call her back, and we later learn that he was going to tell her about his prospective trip to Uruguay. That was what was on his mind at that moment. He wanted to bring it up so that she was pre-alerted to the fact that he's going to be away for a while. Now we come to a unique sequence in the film. As we said, there's a lot of travelling in this film, but this is the only time we see a shot from inside the train, looking out. The sequence begins with these two shots, one a close-up out of the window, the second a wider shot taking in the flowers being held at the left by one of the passengers, and at the right is sitting Taeko, lost in thought. As David Bordwell has pointed out, this sequence as a whole runs about 90 seconds, which is quite long for a sequence in which really nothing is happening. It's just a lady looking pensive and not saying anything. She's listening to, or she's perhaps not listening to, the train announcement about the arrival in Osaka in the late afternoon, or about the racket coming from outside as the train crosses a series of metal bridges. She's obsessed, but here we get repeats of the earlier shots, the flowers at the left, exactly repeating the framing of earlier. And Taeko still not saying anything or doing anything, much less, of course, interacting in any way with the passenger sitting opposite her, who is just a pair of elegant white socks and gaiter, and some flowers, presumably in one hand or leaning against the window there. So Ozu is using a pattern here. It's probably even a metrical pattern, but it's the receding motion of the train is inversely matched by that slight track forward to Mokichi at his desk. So it means that Taeko is going in one direction, away from Tokyo. The camera is going towards Mokichi at his desk. And it signals a kind of contrary motion, obviously, but it also signals a contrary emotion. Wim Wenders, who was a great Ozu fan in the old days before he went Christian, used to go on about the space between motion and emotion, thinking that there was a lot to be said about it. Ozu is the living proof of it, because I think here motion precisely matches emotion. And Ozu will underline it at the end of this sequence, because when Mokichi returns to his office after this fairly startling news, there will be a slight track behind him, a forward track, following him back to the office, or actually he's going to leave for home because he's been given half the day off, and it's matched by the exact counter movement of the house just before he arrives back, where the camera recedes from the entrance hallway into the living room. It's the only time in the film, these two scenes are the only time in the film where Ozu cuts on converse movements. And you can be damn sure it's not an accident. He deliberately did it. So here we go, past the fire buckets. The sequence is in other respects very much the same as the first time. In fact, it's a pattern that, you know, evokes the pinball machine, if you like, the ball passing you the same way. And here's the reverse track, the track away from the radio and the other furniture of the living room as Mokichi comes home. So the troubling discovery is that Taeko is taking some days off, is going away without specifying where or exactly for how long. And it is troubling because she's never done it before, despite their many years of marriage. And it's disconcerting because he had come home early expecting to explain to her what he was unable to explain last night, that he's being posted abroad for a while. As we said, it's not exactly clear. None of the dialogue clarifies this, whether this is supposed to be a posting, a business trip, which will go on for a week, 2 weeks, or whether it's a longer business trip. It's he's being actually posted to run an office in Uruguay. The former seems more likely. This business about sending the telegram is quite interesting in a way. It takes us back to an earlier era. I mean, most people nowadays will have no memory of telegrams or what it was like to send one or to receive one for that matter. But it was the standard way of sending urgent messages because there was no such thing as hand phones, of course, mobile phones. And in this particular case, it's even more difficult because he's not quite sure where he's sending it. He's making an intelligent, informed guess as to where Taeko may have gone, and that's why he's sending the telegram to this place in Kobe, which turns out to be correct. She does, and she later confirms that she did get it. However, because she didn't say where she was going and she didn't give any proper indications, we don't know. I mean, we can't be sure at this point that he sent it to the right place or that she will reach the message. Meanwhile, he's preparing for his early departure. And once again, we hold on the empty room after they both leave a little bit longer than most people would. We start on this empty corridor, which we now know is the upstairs corridor, although we don't see him climbing the stairs, to his room upstairs, a little bit before he enters it. So constantly Ozu is extending shots either forward or backward at the beginning or the end, to give us a little bit more of decor than most directors would do. And it is to do with establishing the space as not exactly a character in its own right, it's not as cliched as that, but as the framework in which these basically routine human interactions will take place. And it's at the moment that the interactions become less routine, as for example, when a marriage is suddenly thrown into crisis, as this one has been, that things start to go a bit wrong, that the patterns are not followed, the corridors become empty. Now, if you go on IMDb, and I don't particularly recommend it, you'll find that there's a whole group of people who complain about this sequence because there are 4 different Pan Am tail fins in this sequence, edited together as if it's just one plane. The tail fin number is changes from shot to shot because Ozu has, although despite his extreme sensitivity to questions of continuity, is not worried about things like the serial number of a Pan Am plane, and he's cut together quite a few. This is our last glimpse of Hirayama, who we last saw reminiscing, singing a wartime song above his pachinko parlor. He's come to see off the chief together with Nonshan, and meanwhile the friends, Taeko's friends, have come separately. Takako and Aya have come to see him off in lieu of his wife, who has not appeared despite the urgent telegram that was sent to Kobe. It is true that the tail fin number is totally different each time. However, Ozu doesn't care, and I don't think we need to care very much either, unless we're real train spotting geeks. But it is true that there's a little irony, let's say, that a director so obsessed with his own idiosyncratic version of continuity should be so oblivious to basic continuity of that kind. But it was to do, obviously, with the practicalities of shooting in Haneda. Haneda at that time, which is it's quite close to central Tokyo, was the main airport. It's now becoming a main airport again after all these years, because Narita, much further away from the city, is becoming less and less popular. But as you can see, Haneda at this time was little more than an airstrip. It's hardly an airport in the modern sense. Mokichi is setting off for what is going to be a very, very long journey. I don't know if and modern people are quite used to the idea of long haul flight. This plane is going to have to touch down many times before it reaches Montevideo. It's far from a direct flight. It will have to stop for refueling, probably the first time in Guam or Hawaii or somewhere in the mid-Pacific, and then somewhere in the American mainland, and so on, as it heads down to South America. There's something to be said here about the talk of fine weather. Ryuchishu has been that way inclined. He's that way. Actually, in a way, you could say this looks forward to the end of Tokyo Story. Just as this shot of the little wind vane circling up there at the top left looks back to something in the previous film, Early Summer. There's a tracking shot, a lateral tracking shot outside the doctor's hospital in Early Summer, which comes to rest exactly on a device like that, little rotating wind vane. And so Ozu obviously liked them. Anyhow, just back to the weather momentarily, there is quite a lot to be said. In fact, there's an essay by the Japanese professor of film Hasumi Shigehiko, particularly about weather in Ozu films, and he points out that Ozu, there's never bad weather in Ozu. No matter the obsessive concern with seasons and being seasonal, we very, very rarely see it rain or snow or any kind of bad weather. It's basically sunny, reasonably warm, and reasonably dry. So that is certainly the case here. So when characters comment on good weather, as Hirayama, the pachinko parlour man, did at the airstrip, it's not so much an anomaly, it's a redundancy. Since it's always goodish weather in Ozu, why do characters point it out? Almost invariably, it means they're suppressing something else. It's a cover phrase. It's a piece of social lubricant for the sake of saying something and not saying something else. And in this case, it's not hard to guess what Hirayama might be thinking as he sees his former chief, with whom he's only just been reunited, something like 8 years after the end of the war, as he sees him flies off to foreign parts, very far parts, further than Singapore, in fact. Now, Taiko's homecoming, confrontation with her two friends, continues the earlier pattern of home truth telling. The confrontation between these women, which starts off in the living room, continues in the darkened bedroom, this Western-style room that is Taiko's. No light until they turn it on. Takako is obliging in that respect, but Aya is the close one. She's the one who was at school with Taiko, so she's the one who remonstrates directly. And Ozu chooses to do it in a two-shot. With eyeline matches. Eyeline matches here exactly signifying discord. The ironic use of a Hollywood convention to signify that they are not seeing eye to eye. So it's when characters do see eye to eye that they look straight at the camera as if the camera were the other person they're speaking to, irrespective of where the other person is in fact positioned. And here the converse, the conventional eyeline match, the gazes forming a kind of imaginary lines that intersect, signifies the precise opposite. That is, not seeing eye to eye. It's an Ozu idiosyncrasy. Now, there's of course more than I'm able to say in this short commentary about Ozu's film language, which is very particular, but I think we should say something in general about his approach to these things. If you see the early films, which are basically genre films, mostly student comedies or gangster films, or sometimes social dramas, melodramas of a kind, then they show a very marked influence from American cinema, chiefly from Lubitsch, Sternberg, and Harold Lloyd. Ozu was a compulsive film goer in his misspent youth. In fact, he frequently skipped school to go to the movies, and he had apparently total recall of everything he saw, right down to individual edits and transitions from scene to scene. So he learned a lot and filed it all away for future use. And when he began making films in the late 20s, he was heavily influenced by American cinema, and he made films that echoed American genres, but he gave them, even from the beginning, a very distinctive Ozu spin. And that increasingly took the form of idiosyncratic film language. He was not unique in this. Other directors at the same time were doing similar things. The difference in Ozu is that he pursued this line of inquiry, and from the mid-30s onwards he began narrowing his film language to eliminate certain conventions, certain orthodox conventions of telling a story. So he did away with dissolves, he did away with fades to black, fades up from black. He did away with conventional transitions from scene to scene, started introducing his own scenes, own ways of linking scenes, sometimes cutting directly, usually picking up on a dialogue reference, sometimes not. And he started inventing devices like this one of the camera receding on an empty room with no precise meaning. Again, emptiness, space, places where characters were seen previously and are now conspicuously missing. But these devices are to do with a film language that is particular to Ozu at this point. Other directors don't do this. Other Japanese directors don't do it, and other Western directors certainly don't do it. This is the receding camera there definitely somehow expressed Taeko's helplessness. She is despairing that she came back too late. She now feels some self-recrimination. She feels guilty. She feels regretful that she ran away. That's the way she did. And in a way, it's paving the way for the reconciliation, which is what's going to come. We're going to see now the beginning of the reconciliation, because Taeko has changed. He hasn't changed. She's come round to his way of thinking. So the woman is the one who has to make the allowances and the adjustment. So David Bordwell notes exactly correctly that in Hollywood films of this kind, I mean relationship dramas, family sagas, that kind of thing, the convention is to speed up as you approach the end. Ozu does the precise opposite. He slows down. So from this point, that's to say Mokichi's homecoming, he's been forced to turn back, his plane turned back. He's here for overnight. He'll be leaving again early next morning on a replacement plane. Maybe one of the other ones we saw on the airstrip. It takes something like 12, 13 minutes, but that's a very long time for a reconciliation scene. Of course, a lot of other things go on in the course of those 12, 13 minutes. There are many interesting developments. There are many curious things that happen. And we finally come to the point of discussing what the meaning of green tea over rice is in this context. We remember, if I can remind you, in the original planned film of 1939-40, green tea over rice formed the climax of the film also, but it was the last meal the husband and wife had together before he went off to war. So it had a simple, homely significance, and it meant that they were both husband and wife would be grounded in a happy memory of eating some simple, homely food. Very unpretentious, very easy to make, very tasty in its way, but nothing special. Deliberately ordinary and everyday kind of food. Here, the green tea over rice still has that meaning. You can't change the meaning. It doesn't become a gourmet dish overnight. It's not possible. However, here the context changes drastically, and so the meaning is different. The humility of green tea over rice, of course, here signals Taeko's capitulation to the simple life. And to underline it, she also lifts her bowl to her lips at the end of this long sequence, eating as she always complained that he used to eat, like a dog. In between now and this agreement to eat, and the fact that you notice that again now they are looking frontally at each other, although they're not directly facing each other in positioning in the space, they gaze at each other frontally as if because of intimacy has been restored. Husband and wife are once again genuinely are seeing eye to eye, and things are back to a previous normality. In fact, they're probably better than they were before. However, they face a challenge now because they don't want to wake Fumi. Suddenly Taeko, who has never shown any consideration before and never said thank you for anything that Fumi has done before, suddenly doesn't want to wake her. She would feel embarrassed about waking her, which is that already signifies a certain change in her thinking. But that means that they have to go and cook it up for themselves in the kitchen, and it's a problem because it seems that they've never set foot in the kitchen before. They have no idea where anything is. They have no idea how to find anything. I guess you could say that it's the climax of the film's satire, the idea that an upper middle class couple would have no idea where anything is kept in their kitchen, wouldn't even know where to find the rice, let alone anything else, is itself quite amusing. And the fact that the wife, for the first time in her life apparently, manages to get her fingers smelling of pickle because she sliced some, is also a kind of you could think of it as an indictment, except that in this context it's basically comic, it's absurd, because most viewers will find it ridiculous that a housewife of this kind, a woman who lives at home, basically doesn't work, would be so unfamiliar with her own environment that she couldn't make herself a simple dish if the need arose. In fact, she can. She does. She improvises and she manages to get through it, but it's absolutely clear that she's never done anything like this before. He insists, he's the one, Mokichi is the one who insists on ochazuke, green tea over rice, and rejects the idea of ham from the fridge. Fridges, of course, were quite new too at this time, so this scene would not have been possible before the war, I don't think, because even in a household as wealthy as this one, I don't think they possessed fridges. They're a post-war innovation coming together with the American occupation. Yone is the housekeeper, and we've seen her a few times in passing, but she doesn't have any dialogue in the film, and she's the other one. Fumi is the one who we actually keep meeting, because she's the one who has dialogue and who is able to connect Mokichi with his own hick roots, the fact that he comes from outside Tokyo and is a country hick in some way, or at least in origin, although a very sophisticated one he's become, is important. So that's why Fumi has a greater importance than Yone. But in fact, Yone's only contribution really in the film is that talking in her sleep just now. And I think the point of it is not so much that Yone talks in her sleep, it's that Taeko is able to shrug it off, and you can be pretty sure that the Taeko we saw earlier in the film would have been up in arms about it. How dare she? What is this all about? Why does she make this kind of noise in her sleep? Here's the pickle slicing, which is going to make her fingers smell of pickle. It reminds us, obviously this is not Mel Brooks, we're not talking about belly laughs here, but this is clearly satirical in its intent, and the audience is supposed to think how ridiculous that they wouldn't even know their way around their own kitchen. And it does remind us that the film is broadly comic. At the time, after he'd made Early Summer, which is a fairly somber film in which there is death and there's a lot of Buddhist imagery as well, Ozu was set to make a film about, again set in the countryside, not in the city, about a mother and her 5 children. It would have been another disparate offspring film, another story about people, characters, younger generation, going in different directions, no doubt in response to the changed Japan of post-war years. But Shochiku didn't want that. Shochiku were looking for something lighter, something more entertaining, and that's when he turned back to the old abandoned script which had been blocked by the censors in 1940. And he was meeting Shochiku's request to come up with something broadly comic, something light anyway in tone, something amusing. So although the film has moments of anguish and seriousness, I mean, I think Setsuko's refusal of the marriage meeting proposal is significant and quite seriously dramatic. That's a fade to black, by the way. That's an interesting thing. There are only 2 fades to black in this film. One is that one, and the other one is at the very end of the film. The final shot fades to black. In many other Ozu films, the final shot fading to black is the only fade in the entire film. Here we have this little one too, but it's more to do with turning the lights out, I think, and again holding on the empty kitchen for a little bit before fading. It began the same way, of course. Needless to say, we started with a black shot and then faded up as the light came on. This is the clincher. This is the moment when the couple are fully reconciled. They sit opposite each other at the table. Their gazes are frontal, so the cross-cutting between them is direct, and there are no impediments. They are absolutely seeing literally eye to eye. They're not even positioned at different places on the table. They are directly opposite each other this time, so that also further underlines the point. A schema that has been steadily introduced through the film reaches a kind of concluding point here. So Ozu, before we started talking about the way that Ozu refined his film language from the mid-30s onwards, this is the kind of point he reached. He develops his own conventions, which are absolutely his own. They have no connection with other Japanese filmmakers of the period, although people did try to sometimes imitate him, but they didn't do it in the same spirit, and they didn't have the same sense of camera placement. So Ozu's sense of space, that he sees space as a 360-degree thing, and he cuts along 45-degree angles within that circumference, so his angles always fit within a certain pattern. That's very systematized. The pattern of editing is systematized. The choice of direct gaze like this is systematized. The choice of indirect gaze or eye line matching in the Hollywood sense is systematized. In this film, the choice of slow tracks in and tracks out, very slight ones, is systematized. All of it is related to emotion. It's related to the drama. It's not to do... It has a formalist current, which is obviously important and interesting and unique to Ozu, but it's completely related to the drama too. It's a way of telling the story. So when he introduces it and he varies it from film to film, it's not the same every time. He is in effect educating the audience as they watch the film. Just as Hollywood films take a certain film grammar for granted, when the audience sits down, they know how the story is going to be told, and on the whole, they will not be expecting any surprises in the way the story is told. If there are any surprises, sometimes there might be in, for example, a Wes Anderson film these days, but he's the exception rather than the rule. In most films, there is an absolutely straightforward adherence to agreed conventions in storytelling. In most films. Ozu not agreeing with the received conventions, and he is, after all, developing these ideas in the 1930s, which is a period of transition towards it's a boom decade for the Japanese cinema, although it declines a bit towards the end of the decade because of the war. But it's an era of mass audiences because, of course, there's no television. Film becomes the main entertainment, the main thing to go out to for many people, and it's very cheap. He's developing his own ideas in this period, and he understands very well that if you're going to follow idiosyncratic paths of your own, you have to take the audience with you. It's no good bombarding them with alien conventions they're not used to. You have to ease them into it gradually, and that's precisely what Ozu does. So he's telling generic stories, he's telling stories about characters that the audience can identify, can recognize, can sympathize with or not sympathize with, predicaments that are more or less familiar to the audiences, and he's telling it in a certain way that invites your complicity at a slightly different level from the ordinary one. Now, those transition shots, they're the most mysterious transition shots in the film, actually, because it's not clear what exactly they relate to. The water tower, it might be near here or it might not be near here, we don't know. And this view we haven't had before, so it looks like they're in someplace else entirely. But the reverse angle, when we cut through 180 degrees, reveals that we are in fact a very similar place. And we're in the same place, we're in Taeko's home. We just haven't seen it look like this before. But it's definitely not that modern apartment building that we saw in the background of the water tower shot just now. So I don't know what that is or where it is. We don't know where the tree is either. It may be somewhere very nearby, or it may be something unrelated. In any event, those two shots, the water tower, the apartment block nearby, and the tree, serve as a time bridge. So we now know that this is taking place sometime later, some days later, and Taeko is telling her friends, the same group, what happened, how they were reconciled, how she came to change her own way of thinking, and everything came right, basically. She apologized. We have seen it happen to some degree, but in the telling, of course, it's clearer. This is the ironic counterpoint to the scene of the hot spring early in the film, when these same four women were dissing husbands. I mean, except Setsuko. Of course, Setsuko is out of it because she's the only one not married. But the other three were dissing husbands, making fun of their gullibility, their stupidity, their boringness, all the rest of it. Now, suddenly, we're talking differently. We're relating husbands to the notion that they have. In fact, the dialogue is explicitly referring back to that time at the spa, and the fact that the husband was not so gullible as to be deceived by the lies. He knew all about it, but he didn't care. He took it as a matter of course. People do sometimes tell lies to each other, even happily married couples, because that's how the wheels are oiled. It's the normal way, and it doesn't matter very much. These are at worst white lies. They're not something that are marriage threatening. It becomes a marriage-threatening matter only when home truths are uttered, and that's what distressed Taeko so much. It has now, happily, led her to think again. This, I think, is Kogure Michiyo, the actress's only role for Ozu. Famously, she had been in Kurosawa's Drunken Angel some years before this. And she's also Mizoguchi's Madame Yuki in Portrait of Madame Yuki a couple of years before this. She's in lots and lots of other films too, but those are, roles that are quite likely to be seen in the West and certainly available on Western home viewing discs. She's a very fine actress. As I said, her casting in effect replaces Kawano Michiko, who Ozu envisaged in the original role. We haven't said anything actually about the girl who plays Setsuko, and we should say a word about her, I think. Her name is Tsushima Keiko, the actress. She'd been in movies for a few years. This is, I think, her only film with Ozu. But A couple of years after this, she has many credits, but a couple of years after this, she is the only woman of any note at all in the whole 3 hours of Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. She plays the village girl Shiho, who the youngest of the samurai tries to date and propositions, and in fact almost rapes at one point. So she has a significant role in Seven Samurai, but she never worked with Ozu again. This little coda at the end of the film takes us to a very nice place, I think. It takes us to a possible burgeoning romance, or possibly not a burgeoning romance. He leaves it completely open. Given the previous discussion, we have to ask, is Non-chan, are we seeing the smiling, elegant surface in his second-hand suits of Non-chan? Are there hidden depths? Are there other sides to him? Is he running off like a hare? Is he swimming underwater with Urashima Taro, the mythical figure in Japan? Or is it a case of what you see is what you get? Setsuko is giving him a hard time, pushing him out of this. We're somewhere near Kojimachi. We don't know exactly where it is, and this looks to me like the guard posts outside an embassy building. It is the embassy district. There are many embassies in Kojimachi. But it's typical of Ozu that he would end the film with this slight track forward. In a film which has had lots of these slight forward and backward movements, the forward movement definitely signifies expectation, if not optimism, about this new relationship.